Hello there. I am M. Price, and this is M. Price Can Read. And as you can imply by the book in my hands, I can indeed read. Today we are going to embark upon an infinite review, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, a rather thick book. I've been reading it off and on for probably about a year now. This is sort of a postmodern encyclopedia style book, encyclopedic, whatever you'd want to term it. The reason for that is because this whole back section, about 150 pages, are actually just footnotes. Hopefully that shows up, and it's not just like, oh, some are just one-line footnotes and whatnot, but indeed some of them are multi-page footnotes. Some of them are almost entire chapters, and you'll read a little bit and then it'll take you to a footnote, and even some of the footnotes have footnotes. And David Foster Wallace himself he implied that having the footnotes was super intentional because he wanted to break up the pace of reading a regular book. If you want to learn more, obviously, about him, check out some of his interviews. He's a very, very mild-mannered man, very soft-spoken, but he has a lot of depth to him, and we're going to explore that here. His life was tragically cut short. He did take his own life. He struggled a lot with addiction in his own life, which Infinite Jest is primarily a book about addiction and mental health struggles and the sort of minutia of daily life. I kind of consider it to be one of the infinity stones on the sort of infinity gauntlet of what some people term to be really pretentious books. If you look at if you went to Goodreads or Amazon or what have you, you'll kind of see two types of reviews. Reviews that think it's the best book ever and that absolutely love it, or reviews that think it's a bunch of nonsense. And maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but that's what we'll be discussing today. I don't really have any real structure to my review here. I'm just going to talk about it. My infinite ramble, much like the book itself. But where do we start? But just a sort of overview of the book. There's no real main character or main through line of a plot. It kind of jumps all over the place. If there had to be a main character, it's generally assumed to be a boy named Hal Incandenza of the Incandenza family. There's Hal and his two older brothers, Mario and Oren, and then their father, who he goes by multiple names throughout. It's James Incandenza, but some people call him himself. Some people call him, the big stork, the mad stork. And then there's Avril Incandenza, who is the mother. And the book sort of follows mostly the children, because by this point, the father has also taken his own life. The mom, also called the moms by the children, everyone has fun little nicknames. She kind of shows in and pops up, pops out. It's mostly about the children and mostly about Hal, because Oren at this time has sort of left Hal's life, and Mario is disabled, so isn't as involved in Hal's life as, say, others would be. And it takes place mostly, Hal's story that is, at the Enfield Tennis Academy, ETA, and it was founded by his parents. Obviously his mom is still working there, his father is not, and his brothers also attend there. They're all basically tennis prodigies. Oren, his oldest brother, left that life and is now doing football, and that's kind of a little subplot that is explored later on, what Oren's been up to. And Hal is basically this very gifted, very talented boy but he's very withdrawn. He's very quiet. He's very much on the sidelines, almost like he's disinterested in his own life. And it sort of follows Hal as he goes through this sort of the wackiness of the Enfield Tennis Academy, all the little strange things that happen there, and just sort of show life from his perspective. And most importantly, the relationship between him and his father. His father, where the Infinite Jest actually, of course, comes from, is his father was an experimental filmmaker and made these really bizarre movies that people didn't really understand, that people didn't get, kind of like there's a book that, no one understands. And he made a series of films called Infinite Jest, and by the time he got to 5 or 6, because they themselves, the historians, don't know if it was 5 or 6, he made the Infinite Jest, the film, and they call it The Entertainment. And The Entertainment is so special because it's a movie that is so addicting, so fascinating, so entertaining that once you watch it, you can't watch anything else. Once you watch it, you're almost hypnotized by this thing, and you don't move, you don't eat anymore, you don't go to the bathroom, you do not leave, and it kills you. You hear that right? It's a movie that hypnotizes you until you basically die from starvation or whatever happens to get you. And the crux of the book is the Infinite Jest is gone, or parts of it are out there, and there's a lot of moving pieces to this book. So basically, North America has been sort of split up, and now it's united into this organization called ONAN, this North Atlantic, kind of like NATO. It's this North Atlantic or North American group, between Mexico, Canada, America. Everyone's all in it together. And it just sounds so wacky trying to explain it. But there's this sort of terrorist insurgent group in Quebec, in like French Canada, Quebec, and they want to sort of take things back to the way it was, and to have this little war, of course, between Canada, America. They want to tear stuff up, and they're looking for the entertainment because they want to weaponize it. At the same time that America is looking for the entertainment because they want to prevent it from getting into anyone's hands. And as you get longer and longer, deeper and deeper into the book, you start to realize that the reason why Hal and Candenza, the boy, the son of the filmmaker, is sort of being stalked by all these people is because they're trying to get information on the entertainment via him and his surviving family members. And there's another little subgroup among this sort of social political upheaval that we're having here called the Wheelchair Assassins. Yes, you heard that right again, the Wheelchair Assassins. It's this radical group of the Quebecois, French Canadians, who are specifically trying to hunt down the entertainment so they can use it. And there's one of the characters, Marath, is like a quadruple agent where he's working for, honestly, it's hard for me to even figure it out for myself. He's working for one, but he's helping out another. And the initial group thinks, oh yeah, we know he's a double agent, but he also secretly sold them out again because he's trying to help his wife. And I won't pretend to know that part. I'm just going to give you all a generalized what's going on in the book, because I think the main soul of the book is its the meaning and the grappling with addiction and suffering and depression and pain. But there's a lot of random stuff going on outside of that sort of gives us all context. But anyway, America, Canada, a lot of political upheaval, and there's a little bit of a Cold War going on between them. And everyone's looking for the entertainment, which is related to our main character, Hal Incandenza. That's pretty much what you need to know. But that is just half of the book, you could say, or maybe even a third, because one of the other main sections of the book is about this man, Don Gately, who is an ex-addict himself and is now working at basically a drug rehab facility next to the Enfield Tennis Academy. Now, Don's story is similar but also different in the sense that he is also struggling with drug addiction, or at least he overcame it, and you get little snippets into his life throughout his story. For more context, Hal, while he's at the Enfield Tennis Academy, slips away to do drugs by himself. He's not like he's a meth head, but he does, lighter stuff. And Don's story centers around him at this rehabilitation clinic, helping people and doing what he can to, it's almost like he's paying back what happened in his life. And, he suffered so much, so now he wants to help others and to make sure that others get basically what he didn't have while he was suffering. And they intermix both the main storylines, Hal's and Don's, towards the end, which is, as you read it, keep in mind this is a 1,000-page book, and there's a lot going on each page, and a lot of, I'm going to read some sections here for you, but a lot of it kind of just descends into jargon and madness and these weird little vignettes as well, which we'll get into. And it doesn't really start clicking until the very end, when everything does start to sort of pull together. And it pulls together just a little bit via the main plot, but I think it pulls together a lot via the story and the messaging behind it, which I think is the main crux of the book, and why I think the reason people misunderstand it and people think it's this really pretentious nonsense sort of heap of a book is because they're focusing on the plot and not on the messaging behind it and the story behind the main events. Because the main events are sort of wacky and out of disproportion, just because he wants this wacky world, because it is at its core kind of a comedy, kind of a funny book. It's an infinite jest, which just for a little side note, refers to in Hamlet, poor Yorick, when he's waxing poetic about life and death, he talks about an infinite jest, and there's a bit of an infinite jest that we'll get into, of course, towards the end of the book, when everything starts making sense. But the reason why it's so weird, in the first 800 pages, is because it does have this weird Hal Incandenza story of him just living his life as a tennis prodigy, and then Don Gately over here doing his weird drug rehab, having his misadventures. And a lot of it sort of descends into these vignettes of, okay, we're just going to learn about one of the rehab patients for 10 pages. We're just going to learn about one of Hal's tennis friends for 10 pages. We're just going to have a one-page thing where you don't even know who's speaking, where it's just this, wall of text. Or we're going to have this thing where, okay, we've been learning about Hal, we've been learning about Don. Well, now we're just going to learn about the President of the United States, who is Johnny Gentle, who is, this clean freak guy. He was this ex-actor who now is a, president, so kind of like that Ronald Reagan vibe, whereas this guy's more of like a Brad Pitt level of everyone loves him, he's just a superstar, and now he's president. And for context, this was written in like 1996, so it's not quite like the Donald Trump level of, okay, now that was a more realized thing, so, kind of like that Simpsons predicting the future kind of deal, where now you have Donald Trump as president, and people like Oprah Winfrey and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson were in talks for being president. maybe our political landscape here in America has just gone so out of control, but maybe David Foster Wallace was had a little bit of foresight in this as well. But you'll have sections about, Johnny Gentle, the president. You'll have sections about the United States Department of Unspecified Services, which that double agent guy may or may not be working for, as the plot thickens. And then you have, the Marath, the quadruple agent, and this other guy, Steepley, who is one of the people who's spying on Hal at the school. And they will talk, in this secret hillside area, and they'll just talk for a bit, and then they'll, go to someone else. The narrative will go to someone else. For all intents and purposes, the book just seems to jump around everywhere and to focus on the most bizarre things and just random people. But going on throughout the book, it seems to really come full circle, and then it's like, oh, it kind of hits you, this is why they were doing that. And now I'm just going to sort of start to go through the book, find some of the sections that I have notated and highlighted. I like to keep track of stuff I read, especially something as big as this, so I can return to it in the future. And we're just gonna go through it here for context as well. In this weird North American amalgam, years and time is now subsidized, and for instance, a lot of it takes place in the year of the Depend adult undergarment. There's the year of Glad. There's the year of, basically it's like you have McDonald's buy a year for branding and say, this isn't 2024, this is the year of McDonald's, because the world has just gotten that amazing, hasn't it? Okay. So a lot of this book, like I've mentioned, and now we're really going to get into it, talks about going through the medical system, addiction, rehab, all of these pretty honestly horrible experiences. And for like a regular writer who maybe was detached from that, they would go into a bunch of research, they would interview people, visit people, and they would then write based upon their, the information they found. If it was just a scene of their book was taking place with this, or maybe a section of their book. But with this, the entire 1,000 pages is just sort of drenched in these experiences, and they're so specific and they're so closely tied to David Foster Wallace. I feel that this is an immensely personal book, and the things that he's describing here are things that like he himself had to have gone through. They're just so specific and so personal in their depth. But we'll just start from the beginning of the book, and we'll take it from there. But this is one of the vignette sections where it's just sort of following one of the just a random person for the moment. They're saying, doctors tend to enter the arenas of their profession's practice with a brisk good cheer that they have to then stop and try to mute a bit when the arena they're entering is a hospital's 5th floor, a psych ward, where brisk good cheer would amount to a kind of gloating. This is why doctors on psych wards so often wear a vaguely fake frown of puzzled concentration if and when you see them in 5th floor halls. And this is why a hospital MD, who is usually hale and pink-cheeked and poreless, and who almost always smells unusually clean and good, approaches any psych patient under his care with a professional manner somewhere between bland and deep, a distant but sincere concern that's divided evenly between the patient's subjective discomfort and the hard facts of the case. We move it a little bit over, and you find out that we're right now following a woman who, like David Foster Wallace will maybe successfully is the wrong word, but she attempted to take her own life. And she's sort of talking about her experiences. And the doctor is asking, the kind of this generic questions, what hurts, how do you feel? And she says, all over my head, throat, butt, in my stomach. It's all over everywhere. I don't know what I could call it. It's like I can't get enough outside it to call it anything. It's like horror more than sadness. It's more like horror. It's like something horrible is about to happen, the most horrible thing you can imagine. No worse than you can imagine, because there's the feeling that there's something you have to do right away to stop it, but you don't know what it is you have to do. And then it's happening too, the horrible thing, the horrible time. It's about to happen, and also it's happening, all at the same time. And then she says, but that's just in your stomach. It's a horrible feeling, but it's just in your stomach. That's why the term sick to your stomach. What I told Dr. Garden is, okay, but imagine if you felt that way all over, inside, all through you, like every cell and every atom or brain cell or whatever was so nauseous it wanted to throw up, but it couldn't, and you felt that way all the time, and you're positive the feeling will never go away. You're going to spend the rest of your natural life feeling like this. So already off to a very swell start. That's only on page 74. God, you can tell I don't talk often. My voice is like already sore. But you get sort of vignettes like that they just describe on an individual level when each person is going through, and you can only imagine that David Foster Wallace himself experienced little slices of each of that, or one of these experiences in here is his, and the others are just very close friends or acquaintances he met throughout these programs that he wanted to preserve. Throughout, you kind of get the feeling that he is like Hal and the father, James, in Candenza. I think he relates with them the most, and we'll get into that, of course, toward the very end. But I just wanted to... Some of the little bits in here are funny as well. It's not all gloom and doom. And one of the fun parts about the weird political upheaval and the geopolitical shifting is this little bit. Move my dog here out the way. It's a herd of feral hamsters, a major herd, thundering across the yellow plains of the southern reaches of the Great Concavity in what used to be Vermont, raising dust that forms a uremic-hued cloud with somatic shapes interpretable from as far away as Boston and Montreal. The herd is descended from two domestic hamsters set free by a Watertown, New York boy at the beginning of the Imperialist migration in the subsidized year of the Whopper. The boy now attends college in Champaign, Illinois, and has forgotten his hamsters were named Ward and June. The noise of the herd is tornadic, locomotival. The expression on the hamsters' whiskered faces is businesslike and implacable. It's that implacable herd expression. They thunder eastward across pedaliferous terrain that today is fallow, denuded. To the east, dimmed by the fulvous cloud the hamsters send up, is the vivid, verdant, ragged outline of the annularly over-fertilized forests of what used to be central Maine. All these territories are now property of Canada. With respect to a herd of this size, please exercise the sort of common sense that, come to think of it, would keep your thinking man out of the southwest concavity anyway. Feral hamsters are not pets. They mean business, wide berth advised, carry nothing even remotely vegetable-ish if in the path of a feral herd. If in the path of such a herd, move quickly and calmly in a direction perpendicular to their own. If American, north, not advisable. Move south, calmly and in all haste, towards some border metropolis. Rome, NNY, or Glen Falls, NNY, New York, by the way, or Beverly, NA, say, or those bordered between them at which the giant protective ATHSCME asks me, fall fans atop the hugely convex protective walls of anodized lucite hold off the drooling and piss-colored bank of teratogenic concavity clouds and move the bank well back north away jaggedly over your protected head. Basically, in this sort of reforming of the countries under this giant Onanite agreement, their new alliance, a little section of the country, now given to Canada, is where all the pollutants and all the waste and all the crap basically got sent, and then it got walled off, and basically it's like this giant fallout zone now, and the Americans push it onto the Canadians, and they don't like that very much, and it's kind of one of the galvanizing movements that have caused these wheelchair assassins, these Quebecois terrorists, to want to get the entertainment in the first place and attack America. But every once in a while, they'll just bring up the concavity and the feral hamsters, and I'll find some more sections for you later on about that. It's pretty fun. I enjoy it. All right, so this, oh god, dog alert. Can you hear that on the microphone? We're gonna keep it in because why not? I'm just checking to make sure this is like a you'll stop. He's part of the infinite jest. This is like a maybe 20-page section, and I'll read the little beginning of it, and maybe a little more paragraphs here and there. But it says if they're talking about, I'll just read it. Who am I kidding? If, by the virtue of charity or the circumstance of desperation, you ever chance to spend a little time around a substance recovery halfway facility like Enfield's MA's state-funded Enid House, you'll acquire many exotic new facts. You will find out that once MA's Department of Social Services has taken a mother's children away for any period of time, they can always take them away again. DSS, like at will, empowered by nothing more than a certain signature stamp form, i.e. one deemed unfit, no matter why or when or what's transpired in the meantime, there is nothing like mother can do. Or, for instance, that people addicted to a substance who abruptly stop ingesting the substance often suffer wicked papular acne, often for months afterward, as the accumulations of substance slowly leave the body. The staff will inform you that this is because the skin is actually the body's biggest excretory organ, or that chronic alcoholics' hearts are, for reasons no MD has been able to explain, swollen to nearly twice the size of civilians' human hearts, and they never again return to normal size. That there's a certain type of person who carries a picture of their therapist in their wallet. That, both a relief and kind of an odd letdown. Can't say that on YouTube. I can't say a lot of this stuff on YouTube, but it sort of just gets on and on and on, and there's this little, that certain person simply will not like you no matter what you do. Then that most non-addicted adult civilians have already absorbed and accepted this fact, often rather early on, that no matter how smart you thought you were, you actually were way less smart than that. And it'll just keep going and going, and it's almost like a fun fact section of what it's like to now, not necessarily facts as a result of living in the Enid House, the halfway house rehabilitation area, but just facts that really sort of come to life to you, like, that there may not be angels, but there are people who might as well be angels, that God, unless you're Charlton Heston or unhinged or both, speaks and acts entirely through the vehicle of human beings, if there is a God. That the smell of athlete's foot is a sick sweet versus the smell of pediatric dry rot is sick sour, stuff like that. We'll get moving. I wish I could just read the whole book for you, or just honestly go read the book for yourself. At this point in the book, there's a lot of just setup of Gately is mostly just getting little snippets of the lives of the people he's with. Hal is just going to practices, doing his routines, living his life, and the sort of political landscape are getting their little vignettes of this is why this is this way, this is why, there's a giant hamster infested concavity in the middle of the country. There's a lot of little comedic bits, like they're talking about how the kids at the tennis academy keep things interesting for their tennis games, and they'll use fun little verbs to describe winning and losing matches. They'll say, Lamont Chu disemboweled Charles Pospilasova, or moonballed him into a narcoleptic coma. They'll say, wow, this student made this student sorry her parents were ever in the same room together. There's a lot about the minutia of what the kids are doing. See if I can find. They have this giant, here it is. We'll go back to that section. Another little weird walls of text, no paragraphs whatsoever for like 10 pages. The Tennis Academy guys have a giant game where it's this tennis match. It's a tennis match, but everyone is together. Everyone is sort of on the same court, and they're representing different countries, and it's a good geopolitical war game, basically, where hitting the ball this way and that is like, throwing missiles, shooting missiles, declaring war, having different peace, and it's just this, like I would read it, but it would take me 20 minutes to read it, because it is just literally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, it's not really that long of a section. Well, it does build up for another probably 10 pages. This little last area is the climax, but it's just them all. Okay, so several kids close in on Ingersoll, triangulating their bombardment. T. Peterson on point. Ingersoll is hit several times, once near the right eye. Jim Trollsch is up and running to the fence, wanting to stop the thing, but Pemulus catches him by the headset's cord and tells him to let them all lie in their own bed. Hal, now leaning forward, steeple-fingered, finds himself just about paralyzed with absorption. Trevor Axford, fist to the chin, asks Hal if he's ever just simply fucking hated somebody without having any idea why. The reason is, we have a dog among us, by the way. The reason... Come up, buddy. Hi, Oliver. Give a bark into the camera, the microphone. No, that's okay. But the reason for this is, you just don't want to, you're just ragdolling right now. Okay, fine. The reason for this is it goes into a giant section about how they're having this game, and then someone breaks a rule towards the very end and has like a direct attack on someone's person, physical person, not just like their land as designated by the game, the tennis court. And it's just this like 5-page long fight scene, of them all kicking the hell out of each other. And, there are just sections like that for 800 pages you just read and you're like, what the hell is this for? like, is my voice even cutting out, by the way, while I'm all back here? But it's just this, you wonder what it's for, because it's 800 pages of just, yeah, we're just going to play this giant tennis game, and we're going to have just rant about this. We're going to have, Mario, the middle brother in the family, is kind of a little filmmaker himself. And it talks about he's going off and making his own little home movies, kind of in the vein that his father made movies, talking about more of the random, bye buddy, more of the random patients at the recovery house, and how, one person will just get a little section as they're talking in a meeting, but then one person's like, hey, this guy goes on nightly adventures and he tracks down animals and, keeps them and attacks them in the middle of the night, and he always has to be going north with his little compass he always keeps and he has on his hand, and he always has to go a certain way home, and this guy starts following him home and talking to him, and it really irritates him. And it's just like, what is any of this for? It's just so random and bizarre, and you just go, God, this book is mind-numbing. And as a reason why it probably took me a year is because you'll read 200 pages and you'll just be like, you can't latch on to anything really. You don't really know what's going on, and your head just gets so befuddled with just the walls and walls of information that seem to go nowhere. This little section right here, this little joke, is actually a little joke that David Foster Wallace, as I guess mentioned repeatedly, must be a favorite of his. He's kind of like Virginia Woolf, where half of what he writes are stories, but half are just essays, very insightful, and sort of figuring out ideas as you write, writing's how do you process these ideas for them. But this little joke is Bob Death smiles coolly. We're talking about all these, these bikers. South Shore bikers are required to be extremely cool in everything they do, and manipulates a wooden match with his lip and says, no, not that fish one. He's talking about it, making a joke. He has to assume a kind of bar shout to clear the noise of his idling hog. He leans in more toward Gately and shouts that the one he was talking about was, this wise old whiskery fish swims up to 3 young fish and goes, morning, boys, how's the water? And swims away. And the 3 young fish watch him swim away and look at each other and go, what the fuck is water? And swim away. The young biker leans back and smiles at Gately, gives an affable shrug, and bats away. Halter tops, can't read that. Anyway, and it just goes on about how Gately's confused about it, and he's like, what? Is that even a joke? What is that? And the metaphor that I found for it was the idea that the young fish are like, what's water? What the hell is this? And they wonder it because they don't consider their own situation, because they've always been in water. They've always been in the same environment, and they don't consider that there's anything else out there. Whereas the old fish knows that they're in water, that there's other, there's a shore, there's, being maybe caught on someone's boat and let go, that there's something else besides where they are. And it's something that he's brought up multiple times in his writing, in his interviews, where I think it's very important for him to realize his situation and where he is at the current point, as well as in terms of recovery. It would be important for people trying to get over their addictions to see, hey, I'm in the water right now, and I don't even really know that I'm in the water. I need a new perspective to not get out, but to realize my current situation and know that this current situation isn't the way that it always has to be. And a lot of the book, through little, snippets like this and throughout, seem to be little snippets of wisdom, almost as if David Foster Wallace himself is your rehabilitation, guidance counselor or whatever, what have you. Though it is unfortunate that he couldn't, do that for himself. Maybe this book was an exploration of different pathways one could take on this addiction journey, and we'll get into more of it. I feel like I keep saying we'll get into that later, but it isn't a 1,000-page book, man. Like, it takes some time. Well, even right after that, Gately is talking about something they seem to omit mentioning in Boston AA. When you're new and out of your skull with desperation and ready to eliminate your map. When people say map, they mean their head, To eliminate your own map means to take your own life. And they tell you how it'll all get better and better as you abstain and recover. They somehow omit to mention that the way it gets better and you get better is through pain, not around pain or in spite of it. They leave this out, talking instead about gratitude and release from compulsion. There's serious pain in being sober, though you find out after time. Then now that you're clean and don't ever much want substances and feeling like you want to both cry and stomp somebody into goo with pain, these Boston AAs start in on telling you you're right where you're supposed to be and telling you to remember the pointless pain of active addiction and telling you that at least this sober pain now has a purpose. At least this pain means you're going somewhere, they say, instead of the repetitive gerbil wheel of addictive pain. Yeah, it's not reading the Da Vinci Code. It's very much, it's not a happy book, okay? All right, the infinite jest of my life has occurred now in this video because I just lost 10 minutes of footage on this thing because I have a really crappy old camera I bought for this channel just because I was playing around and want to see what it's actually like to make videos and whatnot, and I can only film for like 10-ish minutes, and my audio file for the 10 minutes gave out, so now I gotta redo this little section, and I forget exactly what I said, but it's not a happy book. Anyway, we're in the section here, and it's kind of back to the wheelchair assassins, and you get little bits and pieces of this as they're trying to find the entertainment. And here they find one of the not master copy because they need the master copy to replicate and use for war and to try to take over everything. And it also kind of mentions the history of the wheelchair assassins and how they came to be and how it originates via this little ceremony they have as children where they have to jump from like one train to something else and I think another train. And of course you get crippled doing this insane stunt, and how there was one kid who never jumped, and it's implied that that kid became an adult who was a progenitor of this other kid at the Enfield Tennis Academy who Hal sees and who may or may not be having an affair with his mom. There's a lot of weird little hints here and there about what is going on the surface of this like geopolitical intrigue, and not all of it is really too relevant to the main themes I think that are going on. They're just a little flavor for the background, and if you want to get into that yourself, go for it and really dive into the minutiae of what's going on. And it's interesting because a lot of it is, this sort of like, you can imply this, you can imply that, but ultimately it doesn't really mean much because the focus is on, the sort of emotional trajectory of the story. And in an interview for, you already know it's not going to, spoiler alert, whatnot, but the book doesn't really have a solid conclusion. There's no solid A, B, C resolved story. And David Foster Wallace even said something to the effect of the implications are there for you to kind of, put together for yourself what happened. But ultimately, it is a complete book. It is a complete story. And what's there is, the important stuff. That's what you actually need. The rest of it is kind of just like, for you. Here's a little section where they're just talking about kind of satirizing therapy and self-help and a lot of what goes into rehabilitation and trying to change your life. You can kind of tell that he has similar views to myself, because I satirize it in my own book about a lot of what goes into rehab is sort of like kumbaya, let's hold hands kind of thing, and that the real brunt of the work kind of comes from the pain and the suffering and the fact that it is miserable to try to change your life, but that it is worth it in the end, even if you don't have that, cherry blossoms and blue skies forever that some of these kumbaya groups will have you believe. One little bit I do want to read again, because it's worth it, is talking about the hamsters in the great concavity. Lenz speculates openly on how there are propagated to be whole packs of herds of feral animals operating in locust-like fashion and the rhythmic lushness of parts of the great concavity due to the due northeast, descended reputedly from domestic pets and abandoned during the relocation transition to an Onanite map, and how teams of pro-researchers and amateur explorers and intrepid hearts and cultists have ventured northeast of checkpoints along the lucite, assimilated walls and never returned, vanishing in toto from the shortwave EM bands, as in like dropping off the radar. And he talks about some of the theories around the concavity and how there are people who have homes in model repair and impressive equity, and how there are Bob Hope worshipping Rastafarians, and how there are these homunculus like infant cultists that there's a lot of fun stuff, which possess these stelliform pothead reggae swaying infant cultists disappearing forever off the human race's radar every winter, never heard of or smelled again, regarded by fellow cultists as martyrs and or lambs, possibly too addled by blimp-sized dupsters to find their way back out of the concavity, and freezing to death, or unswarmed by herds of feral pets, or shot by property value conscious insects. And it goes on. Yeah, because the insects are the ones with the property and oppressive equity up there. More wheelchair stuff, more try to move things along here just a bit. I have a note here that says, did I actually write this? Talking about, hopefully we got the fish joke analogy in, I don't know if that was in my cut section. Here's another section that's, speaking of cutting, they're talking about the so-called psychotically depressed person who tries to kill himself doesn't do so out of, quote, hopelessness or any abstract conviction that life's assets and debits do not square, and surely not because death seems suddenly appealing. The person in whom its invisible agony reaches a certain unendurable level will kill herself the same way a trapped person will eventually jump from a window of a burning high-rise. Make no mistake about people who leap from burning windows. Their terror of falling from a great height is still just as great as it would be for you or me standing speculatively at the same window, just checking out the view, i.e. the fear of falling remains a constant. The variable here is the other terror, the fire's flames. When the flames get close enough, falling to death becomes the slightly less terrible of two terrors. It's not desiring the fall, it's terror of the flames. And yet, nobody down on the sidewalk looking up and yelling, "Don't," and "Hang on," can understand the jump. Not really. You'd have to have personally been trapped and felt the flames to really understand a terror way beyond falling. And that's especially poignant knowing that later on David Foster Wallace was in that same situation. It talks here about how this is going on back to the Hamlet reference from the beginning, that there may be some persons who are born imprisoned, and talking about how you have this life and there's you have, say, Bob, and Bob is living his life, but there's a secret Bob inside of Bob that he can't show other people. The sort of the fears and the insecurities and the guilt that people carry with them all their life. And talking more about that. And at this point in the book, the vignettes get less and less about, like, say, this wacky person doing this wacky thing, and now they're about these feelings and these it's almost like now each vignette has a little moral or a little lesson to it. So, like, you remember my hideous phobic thing about monsters as a kid, because boy do I ever. This is, I think, Hal, one of his friends, talking. He goes, "Boy do I ever. I think I no longer believe in monsters as faces in the floor or feral infants or vampires or whatever. I think at 17 now I believe the only real monsters might be the type of liar where there's simply no way to tell, the ones who give nothing away. But then how do you know they're monsters then? That's the monstrosity right there, Boo. I'm starting to think. Golly, Ned, they walk among us, teach our children, inscrutable, brass-faced." Speaking of inscrutable, I just heard our dog out in the main room, and I think he came in here, but he came in here during the cut section. I'll try to summon him. If you say hello a lot, he thinks you're on the phone, and he doesn't like when you're on the phone. Hello? 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 No, he's not coming this time. He hates us now. I'll go retrieve him. Dog snatch. Oh, hi, buddy. Oh, no. Can't tell if he's even in frame or not. Whatever. But I have a dog now. Infinite Jest. Yes, that's what we're reading. Going on. As I was picking him up, I was like, there's something about dogs I'm supposed to mention here. Whatever. So, we're getting finally to the meaning. The social, political, whatever upheaval groups, they're starting to track down the people who are involved in the entertainment's creation. And they're interviewing them, they're asking about why these things were made, what was the context of the entertainment, how it even became to be like that. And the noose is very much tightening on, I think Buddy is just going to sleep right here, very much tightening on, it seems, Hal. You kind of get the impression that once they go off on all the people who were involved making the film, they're going to go after the boy, because they're sort of circling the Enfield Tennis Academy, and there's even one of the agents is impersonating someone else, and they're trying to interview Hal, and at some point they capture Orrin, the eldest brother, and they're interrogating him because another agent impersonated a woman to have an affair with Orrin, and it's looking dire, and it's looking like things are starting to coalesce into something tangible. Um, I want to touch on that section I mentioned. Buddy, stay, don't leave. Okay, he's kind of, I don't know if he's still in frame, but where Hal himself is now in therapy, and he's talking sort of to himself, and he's commenting on all the minutia of everyone else's experiences and how it relates to his own, and how he's confused because he feels like his suffering isn't really as valid as everyone else's. So he doesn't know if he really does have a meaningful suffering or if his is just of a different variety. And he says, all through his own infancy and toddlerhood, Hal had continually been held and dandled and told at high volume that he was loved. And he feels like he could have told Kay Baines and her infant, the other guy who's sobbing and holding his little teddy bear, that getting held and told you were loved didn't automatically seem like it rendered you emotionally whole or substance free. Hal finds he rather envies a man who feels he has something to explain his being fucked up, parents to blame it on. Not even Pemulus blamed his late father, Mr. Pemulus, who hadn't exactly sounded like the Fred McMurray of U.S. fathers. But then Pemulus didn't consider himself fucked up or unfree with or without substances. And it almost makes me think of David Foster Wallace himself, and I wonder if he thought that his suffering wasn't legitimate and that maybe he had a good life and he didn't have anything to specifically blame his substance abuse problem on, and he felt invalid, which maybe caused his disconnect with all these therapy sessions, with rehabilitation, with the fact that he does think, oh, all this stuff is just kind of kooky and weird, and now I'm going to make a big old book making fun of it. Now, earlier on in the book, we had the section about the giant tennis match that was like basically cataclysmic in its effects, and all the kids got in trouble with the school afterward, and the tennis match is almost like a central event in Hal's storyline. A central event in Gately's storyline is that he is helping all of the rehab patients move their cars outside on the street, and they get assaulted by this gang of other people, and there's this big fight, and Gately gets shot, and now he's in the hospital. And this basically starting around, page 800, around the last fifth of the book, he's in the hospital bed, and he's sort of thinking about his life, thinking about when he was on drugs, thinking and seeing kind of weird, trippy, almost hallucinogenic visions. And one of the things that happens is he starts to see this wraith, this sort of ghostly figure in his room, and he starts to think of his life as it relates to being in the background of it. Let me see if I can find the exact. All right. Gately's talking about how much he loves the show Cheers and how he relates to Norm in it. Now, this is a bit of a long section, and I might have to cut in the middle depending if I run out of camera. But at this point, the Wraith has started to talk about his life before he became a ghost and whatnot. Keep in mind, yes, this book's really trippy at this point. A ghost talking to this guy who's on his basically maybe possible sickbed, deathbed, dying. And the Wraith is talking about how he made movies when he was alive, and he was really interested in art and film, and how his family, especially his children, didn't really get it. And there's one in particular who was very gifted, he was trying to reach out to. And it becomes apparent that the ghost who's talking to Gately is James Incandenza, the maker of the entertainment. And this is where everything starts to really mesh, and you start to realize why the book is the way that it is. And I'm just going to read this rather large section here. The Wraith is talking about, in Cheers, you have the main cast of people at the bar, but in order to, it's like, a filmic technique to make it seem, oh yeah, it's a real place, you have background actors. Every movie has background actors, and he's talking about these background people. The Wraith says these fractional actors, human scenery, could be seen but not heard in most pieces of filmed entertainment, and Gately remembers them, the extras in all public scenes, especially like bar and restaurant scenes, or rather remembers how he doesn't remember them, how it never struck his addled mind, as in fact surreal that their mouths moved but nothing emerged. And what a miserable fucking bottom-rung job that must be for an actor, to be a sort of human furniture, figurants, the Wraith says they're called, these surreally mute background presences whose presence really revealed that the camera, like any eye, has a perceptual corner, a triage of who's important enough to be seen and heard versus just seen. A term from ballet, originally, figurant, the Wraith explains. The Wraith pushes his glasses up in a vaguely sniveling way of a kid that's just got slapped around on the playground and says he personally spent the vast bulk of his own former animate life as pretty much a figurant, furniture at the periphery of the very closest eyes to him. It turned out, and that it's one heck of a crummy way to live. Gately, whose increasing self-pity leaves little room or patience for anybody else's self-pity, tries to lift his left hand and wiggle his pinky to indicate the world's smallest viola, playing the theme from The Sorrow and the Pity. But even moving his left arm makes him almost faint. And either the Wraith is saying, or Gately is realizing, that you can't appreciate the dramatic pathos of a figurant until you realize how completely trapped and encaged he is in his mute peripheral status. Because, like say for example, if one of the Cheers bar figurants suddenly decided he couldn't take it anymore and stood up and started shouting and gesturing around wildly in a bid for attention and non-peripheral status on the show, Gately realizes all that would happen is that one of the audibilizing named stars of the show would bolt over from stage center and apply restraints or the Heineken remover, and they do say Heineken remover in here, that's not just me being an idiot, or CPR, figuring the silent, gesturing figurant was choking on a beer nut or something, and that the whole rest of that episode of Cheers would be about jokes about the named star's life-saving heroics, or else his fuck up in applying the Heineken maneuver to somebody who wasn't choking on a nut. No way for the figurant to win. No possible voice or focus for the encaged figurant. Gately speculates briefly about the suicide statistics for bottom-rung actors. The Wraith disappears and then reappears in the chair by the bed's railing, leaning forward with its chin on his hands on the railing in what Gately's coming to regard as the classic tell your troubles to the trauma patient that can't interrupt or get away position. For context, Gately is like in a full body cast and he can't speak, all he can really do is move his eyes around and kind of twitch his hand. The Wraith says that he himself, the Wraith, when animate, had dabbled in filmed entertainments, as in making them, cartridges, for Gately's info to either believe or not, but in the entertainments the Wraith made himself, he says he goddamn bloody well made sure that either the whole entertainment was silent, or else, if it wasn't silent, that you could bloody well hear every single performer's voice, no matter how far out on the cinematographic graphic or narrative periphery they were, and that it wasn't just a self-conscious overlapping dialogue of a poser like Schwartz or Altman, i.e., it wasn't just the crafted imagination of oral chaos. It was the real life's real egalitarian babble of figurantless crowds, of the animate world's real agora, the babble of crowds, every member of which was the central and articulate protagonist of his own entertainment. And then kind of goes on and on and on. And the Wraith gets a little bit sad and says, the Wraith blows its nose in a hanky that's visibly seen better epochs and says he, the Wraith, when alive in the world of animate men, had seen his own personal youngest offspring, a son, the one most like him, the one most marvelous and frightening to him, becoming a figurant towards the end. His end, not the son's end, the Wraith clarifies. Gately wonders if it offends the Wraith when he sometimes refers to it mentally as it. Then the Wraith opens and examines the used hanky just like an alive person can never help but do, and says, "No horror on earth or elsewhere could equal watching your own offspring open his mouth and have nothing come out." I'm going to repeat that again. No horror on earth or elsewhere could equal watching your own offspring open his mouth and have nothing come out. Now, I think that is, just skipping ahead to the next section, here's a little funny bit, which we're no longer having funny bits now. I think that is the key to the whole book, really. And there's two parts of that. The first part is he's talking about his filmed entertainment where there are no figurants, there are no extras, there are no side characters. Everyone is basically a hero. And that's what the Infinite Jest is. That's what the film Infinite Jest is that he made in the book. And I think that is why it is so stunning to watch, literally stunning, and why anyone who watches it and is instantly transfixed on it. Because it's not like a normal movie. It's not like James Bond, where you watch James Bond and you're like, okay, there's a superhero guy pretty much doing his thing, A, B, C, okay, now the movie's done. It is something where even the random patron in the back of the bar who you never really see or hear about, he's a star. He's a star of his own world, just as much as, Norm from Cheers is the star of the show. Because in life, everyone is the hero of their own story. I am my own protagonist. You watching, you are your own protagonist. And when you watch the entertainment, because every single person who is being filmed in it is perceived in a light through James's experimental lens, is perceived as their own hero, the viewer doesn't latch on to, say, James Bond. They latch on to whoever they most empathize with in the film. And if it happens to be bar patron number 7, because bar patron number 7 has as much, pathos as, say, James Bond in this situation, because they're equally represented, you latch on to whoever you like the best, and you think, wow, this movie's about me. This movie's about my life. This movie is the most perfect representation of what it's like to be me that I've ever seen, and you become addicted to it, which is why everyone who watches it is just transfixed. And I think James had this fear of the figurants because he thought he was becoming one himself in his own life. And as well with the vignettes of other people, there are little vignettes of him and his life and how his relationship with his parents sort of put him on this track and made him think that he wasn't loved or that he was ignored and that he was drifting to the background, which was why he wanted to represent all these other people so equally. And that last line where he's talking about no horror on earth can match just the pain of watching your son, who, the most like you, the most gifted, talented, basically someone who you look at and go, yeah, that kid's going places. And then, oh gosh, I'm not going places, I guess. And then to see that child, to see your child basically fade into the background like you, to not even necessarily make the same mistakes you made in life, because we're not even talking about mistakes here or wrong turns that led you on this path, but to just see them fall for no apparent reason, really. And it kind of just hits you and it makes sense of, well, this is Hal's entire story. This is why he's been meandering through all these just seemingly random events throughout the entire book, because he himself, Hal, is drifting into the background. He's becoming a background character of his own story, and that is why his father was so transfixed on Hal and so afraid for Hal, because he sensed that despite all the things he tried to do to get Hal active and interested and to try to make these entertainments too, he goes on, he just wanted to make people happy, and he wanted specifically Hal to be happy and to not have a life that he had. Hal just kind of does that anyway. Regardless of how much anyone else tries, Hal just keeps drifting and keeps drifting. And it suddenly hits you that, yeah, like, I've basically been watching this kid fade into the background for 800 pages. I've been watching him die this invisible death. And then the context of all the other random vignettes becomes clear, because whereas the movie Infinite Jest made all the figurants their own protagonists, the book Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace is making all the random students at the Enfield Tennis Academy. He's making all the random patients at the drug rehab house. He's making everyone their own hero. Whether you get a page to yourself that's just all dialogue, just a page out section where you don't even know the name of the person who's speaking, or if it's about the president, or if it's about the random double, triple, quadruple agent, or if it's about whoever, just a random side character, everyone is given the same amount of gravitas and just equal respect in this book. Almost like anyone who reads it would latch on to whom they most empathize with and who they, I really like this kid. This guy suffered kind of the way I suffered. This person's going through the same struggle I went through. And everyone latches onto it and thinks that a different person or a different storyline is the main storyline or is the main character. Because that's the way it's designed. Sure, Hal is kind of the main character, and the focal point is mostly on him, and you can argue that maybe David Foster Wallace really felt especially for Hal and for his father. But everyone else is there too, and everyone else, their pain and their struggle and their transformations, if they get one or not, are all equally as valid as Hal's. And it's almost like hey, you're not suffering alone. All these other people are suffering with you, as well as never get too much into your head about your own suffering, because you're not the end-all be-all of it. And that everyone has different flavors of suffering, where even Hal in his therapy was like, I wish I could be like this guy and have just a very specific thing to blame it on. Say I was raised wrong, or I was introduced to this wrong, what have you, and not just be sort of tied up in your mind and confused like Hal is, and I imagine David Foster Wallace was, or he wouldn't have, written this thing. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, well, the two main stories have connected. In the vignettes, the political stuff is getting closer to the family. Stuff's probably going to happen now, right? Well, wrong. The last 200 pages sort of just shows Hal in a clearer focus, rotting from the inside, and it shows Gately thinking about his past and his life and what led him there, with an occasional little vignette here and there about what else is going on. I want to read a little bit about Hal's life. It goes between Hal's, he finally had like a first person, you've had it a little bit, but a first person perspective directly from Hal. I was moving down the damp hall when it hit. I don't know where it came from. It was some variant of the telescopically self-conscious panic that can be so devastating during a match. I never felt quite this way off court before. It wasn't wholly unpleasant. Unexplained panic sharpens the senses almost past enduring. Lyle had taught us this. You perceive things very intensely. Lyle's counsel had been to turn the perception and attention on the fear itself, but he'd shown us how to do this only on court, in play. Everything came at too many frames per second. Everything had too many aspects, but it wasn't disorienting. The intensity wasn't unmanageable. It was just intense and vivid. It wasn't like being high, but it was still very lucid. The world seemed suddenly almost edible, there for the ingesting. The thin skin of light over the baseboards is varnish, the cream of the ceiling's acoustic tile, the deerskin brown longitudinal grain in the rooms as doors darker wood, the dull brass gleam of the knobs. It was without the abstract cognitive quality of Bob or Star, which is like slang for drugs. The turn signal red of the stairwell's lit exit sign. Sleepy T.P. Peterson came out of the bathroom in a dazzling plaid robe, his face and feet salmon-colored from the showers as heat, and vanished across the hall into his room without seeing me wobbling, leaning against the cool mint wall of the hallway. But the panic was there too, endocrinal, paralyzing, and with an over-cognitive, bad trip-like element that I didn't recognize for the very visceral on-court attacks of fear. Something like a shadow flanked the vividness and the lucidity of the world. The concentration of attention did something to it. What didn't seem fresh and unfamiliar seemed suddenly old as stone. It all happened in the space of a few seconds. The familiarity of academy routine took on a crushing, cumulative aspect. The total number of times I'd schlepped up the rough cement steps of the stairwell, seen my faint red reflection on the paint of the fire door, walked the 56 steps down the hall to our room, opened the door and eased it gently back, flush in the jamb to keep from waking Mario. I re-experienced the years as total number of steps, movements, the breaths and the pulses involved, then the number of times I would have to repeat the same processes, day after day, in all kinds of light, until I graduated and moved away, and then began the same exhausting process of exit and return in some dormitory at some tennis-powered university somewhere. Maybe the worst part of the cognitions involved the incredible volume of food I was going to have to consume over the rest of my life, meal after meal plus snacks, day after day after day. Experiencing this food in toto, just the thought of the meat alone, 1 megagram, 2 megagrams, I experienced vividly the image of a broad, cool, well-lit room piled floor to ceiling with nothing but the lightly breaded chicken fillets I was going to consume over the next 60 years, the number of fowl vivisected for a lifetime's meat, the amount of hydrochloric acid and bilirubin and glucose and glycogen and glucanol produced and absorbed and produced in my body, and another, dimmer room filled with the rising mass of the excrement I'd produce. The room's double-locked steel door gradually bowing outward with the mounting pressure. I had to put my hand out against the wall and stand there hunched until the worst of it passed. I watched the floor dry. Its dull shine brightened behind me in the snow light from the east window. The wall's baby blue was completely filigreed with the bumps and clots of paint. An unmopped glob of Kenkel's spit sat by the corner of VR5's door jamb, quivering slightly as the door rattled in its frame. There were scuffles and thumps from upstairs. It was still snowing like hell. When I read that, I just think of, it's like at that point that I think his mind has taken over. And Hal's section ends kind of on a random note, thinking about his mom and the affair with one of the other students. Probably 50 pages before the end. He doesn't really get a proper send-off. He ends up sort of non-verbalizing to his friends, making just like grunts and moans, and he's like on the floor. He can't even move. He's just like literally curled up into a ball, waiting to die kind of thing. He just folds into himself in a way that is so sad, but also so relatable to someone who has also like struggled with addiction and with addictive tendencies. And to know that it doesn't really end well for Hal. He doesn't really get, he doesn't get a nice conclusion. He's talking more here about when the Wraith, James and Candenza, was talking to Gately. Gately kind of wondered, why aren't you just talking to your son if you can talk to anyone on Earth if you're a ghost? And there's very much the tone that he was an unreliable narrator, James was. And he's thinking about, Hal is thinking about his mom and his dad, and how his dad withdrew and withdrew more, and it seemed that his mom had this weird hold on his dad, and how parallel to when the father is talking about the son, he is like, yeah, I couldn't stop it, I couldn't help him, I couldn't do anything. Well, now the son's talking about the dad and being like, I couldn't stop him, I couldn't help him, I couldn't do anything. Almost like both of their minds were blocking themselves from making a true connection, from really reaching out and latching onto each other. And it ends with this little sort of definition of addiction. Hal says, it now lately sometimes seemed like a kind of black miracle to me that people could actually care deeply about a subject or pursuit and could go on caring this way for years on end. Could dedicate their entire lives to it, whether, it's tennis or his dad's films or whatever your hobby, your pastime or pursuit is. It seemed admirable and at the same time pathetic. We are all dying to give our lives away to something, maybe. God or Satan, politics or grammar, topology or philology. The subject or the object seemed incidental to this will to give oneself away utterly. To games or needles, to some other person, something pathetic about it. A flight from, in the form of plunging into. Flight from exactly what? These rooms blandly filled with excrement and meat? To what purpose? This was why they started us here so young, to give ourselves away before the age when the questions why and to what grow real beaks and claws. It was kind in a way. Modern German is better equipped for combining gerundives and prepositions than its mongrel cousin. The original sense of addiction involved being bound over, dedicated, either legally or spiritual, to devote one's life, plunge in. And it makes you wonder if not only was Hal's obvious drug addiction, and for context, the father was an alcoholic his entire life up until like the last little section where he was making Infinite Jest. Infinite Jest was the only thing he ever made sober, and then he killed himself afterward. It makes you wonder, like, was his making of films an addiction? Was Hal's tennis an addiction? Is my personal pursuit of writing an addiction? Is your pursuit of whatever you do an addiction? What are we really plunging into? Are we doing it to avoid something? Like Hal says, are we trying to run away from something through our pursuits and our pastimes? And interesting questions come up here because it's just like you think of addictions only as something obviously detrimental to yourself, like, substance abuse. But you can turn anything into an addiction. And were the addictions of their pastimes one of the reasons why the father and the son couldn't really connect to each other, because they were too lost in their own heads to really interact? And what would the solution have been? They were both actively trying to help, each other as well as themselves, and it didn't work out for them. What is David Foster Wallace trying to tell us? That there is no hope, that you're screwed, that do as you might, you're kind of just trapped in the situation that you're in. That's where the Hamlet comes full circle. You're just trapped in Denmark, like Hamlet so often says he is. What's really going on here? And I don't know, it kind of makes you wish you were just reading, the Da Vinci Code or something simple, something that you wouldn't have to rack your mind about for all this time. And yeah, that's when it finally comes out, after 800-ish pages of just sort of nonsense, it hits you and it makes sense. And it's like, wow, this is why this is here. And I think maybe even in my arrogance that this is where the drop-off occurs, where people either say this book is a bunch of nonsense garbage, it just sucks, makes no sense, and where people think that it's brilliant. I think it is either a you get it or you don't get it kind of moment. And you can only really get it if you yourself have gone through these struggles and these addictions. Like, I can't imagine someone who has never struggled with addiction themselves, or struggled with depression, or struggled with any of that to really understand this book. It kind of goes back to when Hal was talking about how he wished that he had something more specific to latch onto, and that he was upset that he feels sad and depressed over such an abstract concept. I feel like that's what this book captures the most. It captures the malaise and the melancholy of just living, of just going on day to day and having to think these thoughts, and this futility of trying to get better but not really making any progress. And you try to get better with these things that everyone says will help you, and you can just sort of see them and they don't really help you at all, and you kind of make fun of them, and the people involved in it don't even really seem to believe it themselves. They're just kind of going at it, and then people get out of it, and then they just relapse and they get back into the shit of it. And it's something that I feel like if you're not a figurant yourself, a figurant like they talk about, I can't see how you would relate to it either. If you were like, the star, of your own, if you had all this adulation and praise and you were just the hero of everyone's life around you, then, if you had never experienced the fading into the background in your own life, I don't think you'd like it either. I think you'd think it was just nonsense. But having these experiences and knowing what it's like to be in Hal's shoes and to sort of not understand why you're so sad or why you're so dejected, it just makes sense in that weird way of, it's not this immediate, on the level, screaming, searing pain of, say, getting tackled to the ground and beat up. It's something more insidious, this sort of pain of, it chips away at you every day a little bit. It's like this corrosive acid, this corrosive cloud that is kind of chasing you, almost dragging behind you, Like it's this very passive death, slow, long, and just as subtle as they can make it, so that you keep on living your life and you think that, I'm just making it to the next day, but you're becoming less and less like yourself every day. You're becoming like his father feared. You open your mouth and nothing comes out. You don't even really realize that. You're losing your mind. And it reminds me of a section here. We'll see if I can. Okay, never mind. I got to touch on this section first. While Gately is basically incapacitated and just sort of watching everything with his eyes and his ears, the nurses and the doctors are trying to give him painkillers, pain medicine, and he's trying whatever he can to not get on it, because he knows that he's had addictive tendencies in the past and he doesn't want anything to do with it. And he's talking about how they were leaving him trapped in himself, a figurant, mute and unmoving and blank, like the house's catatonic lady slumped moist and pale in her chair. And how he has been, whereas Hal is, metaphorically becoming a figurant. I think at this point David Foster Wallace is getting the old hammer and hitting you over the head with it and saying, Gately is quite literally turning into this helpless husk. He cannot escape. I think that's a strategy that I myself have used writing, that I see here, that I've recognized in James Joyce's works, another modernist people claim not to understand. It's this idea of, you can have this weird, esoteric, rambling, random novel, right? But at some point you do have to sort of get your hand out and pull the reader and say, hey, but this is why I was doing this. This is why it makes sense. And tell me I'm full of shit all you want. Go ahead. I don't care. I'm used to it. but I think Gately is the very on the surface, um, literal representation of what's going on. And Gately is thinking, it occurs to Gately that right now is just like when he was a toddler and his mom and her companion were both passed out or worse. No matter how frightened or scared he might become, he now again cannot get away anybody to come or to hear or even know about it. The discredited tube to prevent viscous or inspired bleeding in his suspicious trachea has left him completely alone, worse off than a toddler that could at least bellow and yowl, rattling the bars of his playpen in terror that nobody tall was in any shape to hear him. He literally feels like a kid, and he's becoming a figure and has robbed him of his individuality, of his presence, and most importantly, of all the work that he has done trying to better himself in his own life. Because you watch Hal sort of dissolve into nothing and you think, well, maybe Hal can turn it around, maybe Hal can get better. And then you see Gately, someone who was in a similar situation of Hal, who did get better. And now through this random happenstance, he's back in it, he's back where he begun. And you just wonder, God damn, like, why would David Foster Wallace want us to have this really negative picture in our head? And then it sort of culminates in a moment that also culminates with the actual, the external plot of the book. And Gately is just fever dreaming out. And he mentions his fever is way worse, and his little snatches of dreams have a dismantled cubist aspect he associates in memory with childhood flu. He dreams he looks in a mirror and sees nothing, literally invisible, literally gone, and keeps trying to clean the mirror with his sleeve. One dream consists only of the color blue, too vivid like the blue of a pool. An unpleasant smell keeps coming from his throat. He's both in a bag and holding a bag. Visitors flit in and out, but never Ferocious Francis or Joel Van D. He dreams there's people in his room, but he's not one of them. He dreams he's with a very sad kid, and they're in a graveyard, digging up some dead guy's head, and it's really important, like continental emergency important. And Gately's the best digger, but he's wicked hungry, like irresistibly hungry, and he's eating with both hands out of a huge economy-sized bag of corporate snacks, so he can't really dig. Well, it gets later and later, and the sad kid is trying to scream at Gately that the important thing was buried in the guy's head, and to divert continental emergency to start digging the guy's head up before it's too late. But the kid moves his mouth, and nothing comes out. And Joel Van D appears with wings and no underwear and asks if they knew him, the dead guy with the head. And Gately starts talking about knowing him, even though deep down he feels panic because he's got no idea who they're talking about. While the sad kid holds something terrible up by the hair and makes the face of somebody shouting in panic, "Too late." So the sad kid is obviously Hal. They're digging up his father's corpse, and supposedly the entertainment must be in there. And then he's holding up something by the hair and crying, something is too late. So is the entertainment with James's dead body? I guess so. Are Gately and Hal going to team up to save the world? I guess so. But are they too late? Well, it appears that way. And at this point, they've both become figurants. Hal is trying to scream and tell Gately instructions, and he can't understand anything he's saying. It's like they're too late to their own sort of salvation. They can't reverse the damage that has been done to them. More gloom and doom and despondency. And this book is something else, isn't it? So I guess kind of like how Foster Wallace himself was like, yeah, there's no really concrete explanation of what happens, but it's implied. I think it's implied that the wheelchair assassins, the terrorists, get the entertainment in the end. But it's not really important. So they finally kidnap the lady who starred in the entertainment, right? And they're interviewing her. And she's saying, it had nothing to do with killing himself, less than nothing to do, because she acknowledges that the master copy is indeed buried with him. And he didn't, kill himself because he wanted to hide the copy. He killed himself because I guess he went sober and he couldn't handle it. I don't know that he ever got a finished master. That's your story. There wasn't anything. The masters of everything unreleased were buried. So there wasn't anything unendurable or enslaving in either of my scenes. Nothing like these actual perfection rumors. There are academic rumors. He talked about making something, quote, too perfect, but as a joke. He had a thing about entertainment, being criticized about entertainment versus non-entertainment, and stasis. He used to refer to the work itself as entertainments. He always meant it ironically. Even in jokes, he never talked about an anti-version or antidote, for God's sake. He never carried it that far, a joke. When he talked about this thing as, quote, perfect entertainment, terminally compelling, it was always ironic. He was having a sly little jab at me. I used to go around saying the veil was to disguise a lethal perfection, that I was too lethally beautiful for people to stand. It was a kind of joke I'd gotten from one of the entertainments, the Medusa Odalisque thing, that even in UHID I hid my hiddenness in denial about the deformity itself. So, Jim took a failed piece and told me it was too perfect to release. It paralyzed people. It was entirely clear that it was an ironic joke, to me. And then they keep asking her more questions, and she goes, that's the part of the joke he didn't know. Where he's buried is itself buried now. It's in your annulation zone. It's not even in your territory. And now if you want the thing, he'd enjoy the joke very much, I think. Oh shit, yes, very much. So the master copy of Infinite Jest and anything else unreleased is buried in his head in his grave. And where is his grave? But the concavity. Because, the family is there in Maine, and that's part of the area that was sectioned off, and they got moved out. So you have this. It's hard because there are so many unreliable narrators giving their opinions of who is doing what and what is coming from where. And the crux of it seems to be that he made these experimental works, and basically the last one was a sort of joke. He wanted to make it too perfect because everyone was, equally represented. Everyone had a perfect role in the film, and it was so good it would paralyze people, and that the last sort of joke on people was that you can't even get it. Though it's implied, I guess, through Gately's dream that, they do get it. And at this point, the book shifts to purely Gately, and you kind of forget everyone else. And it's just Gately talking about his life growing up. He was also pretty talented, kind of like Hal. Instead of doing tennis, he did football, which is a weird parallel to Hal's brother Orrin, who left tennis to do football, whatever. And how he got into drugs, and it ruined his life, and he, basically got derailed, and he got involved in crime and all these other terrible groups. And the final section doesn't involve any real plot thing or any even really deeply meaningful thing. To me, it hits as a sort of thematic climax, in the sense that this whole thing is about addiction, about rehab, about abuse, but you never really see any mass traumatic scene of just collective madness. And you don't get that to the very end, where I'll read it here for you. I'll read the last paragraph. Gately and one of his associates basically, get high on their own supply, and they go on this huge bender in this hotel room. And in the morning, the rest of the gang comes and they find them, and they're like, hey, you can't be doing this. And they torture the other guy to death, but they let Gately survive because they're like, yeah, we know it wasn't you. We know you were being manipulated, so we're going to let you live. And then everyone shoots up together, and they all get this collective fever dream, mass psychosis. Everyone's high. And to me, it sort of feels like the whole world is like shaking, and that it's like, if this was a movie, you'd have this crazy, like, thrumming, uh, like a 2-note score, almost like Jaws. You just rapid fire, um, just audible pain, basically. The camera would be like vibrating. It would just be this, um, as much as you can represent people just losing all sense of self and all sense of willpower. Read it here for you. The very air of the room bulged. It ballooned. Fackelman's screams about lies rose and fell, hard to hear against the arterial roar of the sun. MCC was trying to muffle a cough. Gately couldn't feel his legs. He could feel C's arms around him, taking more and more of his weight. C's arms muscles rising and hardening. He could feel this. His legs were like opting out. Attack of floors and sidewalks. Kite used to sing a ditty called 32 Uses for Sterno Me Lad. C was starting to let him down easy. Strong, squat, hard kid. Most heroin men you can knock out with a boo. C, there was a gentleness about C. For a kid with the eyes of a lizard, he was letting him down real easy. C was going to protect Bimmy Don from the bad floor's assault. The supported swoon spun Gately around, C moving around him like a dancer to slow the fall. Gately got a rotary view of the whole room in an almost untankable focus. Point Grave was vomiting chunkily. Two of the fags were sliding down the wall they had their backs to. Their red coats were aflame. The passing window exploded with light. Or else it was DeMontes that was vomiting and Point Grave was taking the TP's viewer off the wall and stretching its fibroid wire over towards Fackelman against the wall. One of Fax's eyes was as open as his mouth, disclosing way more eye than you ever want to see on somebody. He was no longer struggling. He stared paratically straight ahead. The librarian was starting on his other eye. The bland man had a rose in his lapel, and he'd put on glasses with metal lenses, and was blind high and missing Fax's eye with the dropper half the time, saying something to Point Grave. A transvestal had PHJ's torn hem hiked up and a spiderish hand on her flesh-colored thigh. PHJ's face was gray and blue. The floor came up slowly. Bobby C's squat face looked almost pretty tragic, half lit by the window, tucked up under Gately's spinning shoulder. Gately felt less high than disembodied. It was obscenely pleasant. His head left his shoulders. Jean and Linda were both screaming. The cartridge with the held-open eyes and dropper had been the one about ultraviolence and sadism, a favorite of Kite. Gately thinks sadism is pronounced sadism. The last rotating sight was the chinks coming back, I can't say that, through the door, holding big shiny squares of the room. As the floor wafted up and C's grip finally gave, the last thing Gately saw was an Oriental bearing down with held square, and he looked up into the square and saw clearly a reflection of his own big square, pale head with its eyes closing as the floor finally pounced. And when he came back to, he was flat on his back on the beach in the freezing sand. It was raining out of a low sky, and the tide was way out. So yeah, everyone just does drugs and goes insane together. And Gately is literally spinning out of control with this guy supporting him as he sort of careens towards the floor, and he's seeing all this. Every person in the group is just having their own individual breakdown, and he kind of blacks out and he wakes up and it's raining and he's alone, he's on the beach, and it's sort of this little new revival. And I would find that ending more inspiring if he had a new revival and he just went on and he did his thing, but with the context that in the future, yes, he does get better and he becomes this rehab worker, well, then he just spirals back into being a figurant. So it's kind of like, thanks, David Foster Wallace. And then you think, well, maybe him and Hal will adventure and they'll meet up together and they'll save the world. Well, okay, sure, they find James's corpse and the entertainment's not there, so it's too late. And now this weird geopolitical nonsense is going to get off, and war is going to happen and everything's going to turn to hell. So, like, I guess my review of it, to finally get into it like an hour and a half in, is that I think it really is a brilliant book. It's brilliant on the page in its execution and its depictions of pain and suffering and basically just despair, because you kind of wonder at the end if anyone really is going to make it out okay. And you wonder if he is just trying to make light of all the despair in his life and trying to find, humor in the pain. Or if kind of how, like, the movie Infinite Jest is supposed to be making fun of movies. It's supposed to be bordering on the line of entertainment versus anti-entertainment. Something compelling and something of stasis. Is this book supposed to be the same way? Is this book supposed to be a book that you're not supposed to finish? That you're not supposed to like? Is it a book that you're supposed to get to page 300 and be like, nothing has happened so far, I'm just going to quit? While everyone else tells you, just keep reading, just keep reading, just keep reading. It makes me wonder, like, did he intend to make something so pretentious that would intentionally scare people away and intentionally get people to mock him and make fun of him, knowing that there were, sort of secrets within, and that he wanted to cater to a very specific group of people like himself, who he ideally got some sort of, catharsis from writing this. And maybe he hopes that people who went through similar things that he did, or Hal, or Gately, or any of the, so-called figurants in this book, will find, whether it's even just a page that they'll empathize with, and they'll be like, maybe life's a little bit better than I thought it was, and it'll give them the strength to go on. And that people who didn't want this, or didn't want to think about this, or who were in denial, just want to come close to it, because they'd be turned off within 10 pages. What's weird about this, I want to tell, is I was inspired to write my book, Please Feel Bad I'm Dead, after I read Charlie Kaufman's book, And Kind, right? And reading And Kind, or now reading this, I'm like, oh my God, it's so weird, because And Kind was like clearly inspired by this, I feel. You have in And Kind, you have the unseen. Well, aren't the unseen just the figurants? Aren't the invisibles in my book just the unseen from Mankind, just the figurants here? And then going further back, look at Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground. Aren't the figurants just the men of thought? The character of that Dostoevsky, his novella technically, is talking about how there's this sort of dichotomy of people, of personalities. You have the men of action and the men of thought. The men of action do things with their lives, and they go on, and they build businesses, and they get married, and they have kids, and they do all these great things. And then the men of thought basically sit back, crippled by their own anxieties and their guilt and their depressions, and they think, oh, I can't do that, I can't do anything, and they become prisoners of their own minds. Is it just this sort of train of inspiration? This arc of, artists, copy or steal, or whatever you want to call it. And I wonder maybe if that was the point of this. He was just trying to cater to people who would understand him. And you look at Charlie Kaufman, all of his stuff is about this existential dread and this existential pain. And it reminds me of, I think, his greatest film, Synecdoche, New York. Synecdoche is Synecdoche. It looks like Synodoche. I don't know. It's Synecdoche, New York. I'm a terrible speller. And it's about, I feel, a similar thing as this, where in the film is also very convoluted and pretentious and esoteric. And I think, frankly, it's a film that it's not between you either understand it or you don't. It's you either understand it or you refuse to admit you understand it. Because that film's a film about suffering, about aging, about doubt. It's a film, I think, that is like the only truly universal film where everyone could really look at it and be like, yeah, I felt these same sorts of pains regardless of who I am, because it's about a core branch of humanity. And I wonder if this is a sort of similar deal as well. Maybe it's not, just if you've gone through addiction, then you'll get it kind of thing. But you'll either look at it and you'll think, wow, this is brilliant, this is something straight out of my life, or you'll see it and you'll be like, yeah, doesn't ring a bell to me, it's all Greek to me, I don't get it, and try to pretend that it doesn't pertain to you, because the truths in it are honestly rather painful. For all of this, and what I've been talking about for an hour and a half, I really do think this book there are profundities to it. I don't know. I don't think it's the most profound book necessarily. I think, for instance, Dostoevsky, can, instead of Infinite Jest being 1,000 pages, Notes from Underground is like 100 pages. You can definitely do it a little simpler. I think Foster Wallace could have narrowed his breadth a little bit, but at the same time, I don't know if that would cut back from the idea that everyone is a figurant and all the figurants get the spotlight. And honestly, you probably couldn't make Infinite Jest any other way. And then he has all these sections of just almost technical jargon, which you wonder if they'll ever amount to anything. But I don't know. I'm not I say this at the end of a review. I'm not the person to review things and to give like a coherent, this is a 9.7 out of 10. I think it is a great book, and I think it's worth reading, but only worth reading if you really do have the time and dedication to read something this big and just all encompassing, or just read excerpts of it. You don't have to tackle the whole thing, because it is a behemoth of a book. Yeah. I hope you've enjoyed my infinite rambling on Infinite Jest. I hope you don't think I'm too stupid, but if you do, your problem, I guess. You could have turned it off an hour and a half ago. If you think I'm too stupid at this point, joke's on you. You could have left a long time ago. You're still listening to me. And if you are still listening to me and you liked what you heard, well, thank you. I hope to do some more of these. I know my channel has taken on a lot of different forms, whether it's ASMR or film essays that get taken down from YouTube, curse you, or, whatever. You know me, I just do a little bit of everything. But I did like reading this book. I liked thinking about it. I think it is kind of fun to do little reviews and whatnot. So we'll see where this goes. Other than that, yeah, what's going on in your life? Tell me about yourself. Leave a comment down below and let me know if you've read Infinite Jest, if there's other books like this that you've read. I came to this book because a review of my book told me that it reminded them of this book and some other books that I had read and did like. And I'm like, well, I've heard of it, but I've never read it. I might as well give it a shot and read it. And I'm like, yeah, I could definitely see more so the negative side of it. Of, yeah, someone probably read my book and this book and both thought they were a bunch of fucking nonsense, which they're, probably not too far off. Who knows? But I enjoyed spending my time with you. I wish Oliver Buddy would come out and dog around with us a little more, but he's too good for us. He's hanging out on the couch. You know me, I'm M. Price. This is M. Price Can Read. I can indeed read. Whether I read this book or a bunch of cliff notes about the book, I did read something. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you do something nice for yourself today. And always, Dog City never sleeps.